so we can get this started. Okay. And so I think this, we wanted to kind of set the space with just, like folks have already kind of started uplifting like the challenges in general that they're seeing in supporting students apply for AB 540. And we at Immigrants Rising have just through the work that we've done in the last couple of years have also seen a lot of those challenges in the field. And we think that we've listed for you here on the screen just like some of the different like high level like roadblocks that make it hard to kind of like implement AB 540 similarly across the different systems. Because we've also heard from a lot of students that they could go to one college, get one advice or one guidance around AB 540, and then when they go to another one or they transfer to another one, a person will give them a different guidance or advice around AB 540. And so it's really confusing on how to navigate those systems. On top of already the confusing kind of requirements around AB 540. And so this slide right here kind of talks about the different processes, not just across systems, but really across the California public college systems or higher education system that also exists, that also make it hard for students transferring between those institutions to navigate AB 540, right? The first one is around certification versus self-certification of affidavit. I believe all the UCs and CSU actually require like proof of transcripts or some sort of attendance records to show that you've met those requirements for AB 540, while some like community colleges allow like self-certification where they don't have to turn those in, but those could be based on district decisions. There's also across the different systems and campuses, different timelines for submitting the affidavit. So students may not know when they need to get that in by in order to get their financial aid on time. And financial aid also may not be visible in that campus for that student until the affidavit is processed. And students may not know like, oh, I turned in my California DREAM Act, what happened to my financial aid? And they might not know that that's an issue until they go to somebody who can identify that problem. There's also an issue around like having a high school diploma from another state or another country that could prevent students from being considered for AB 540, and folks who may not follow the like traditional quote unquote pathway from high school into college, like older returning students who may have a hard time kind of navigating the requirements and becoming eligible. With the expansion of AB 542, there's also like a lot of outreach materials and website that don't fully list out all of the new requirements. Thinking about SB 1141, right? Is that 2-year cap still listed on your website, or is that something that's no longer there? Because that could again signal to folks, oh, this is actually open to me now and it wasn't like a year ago too, right? And then I think somebody brought this up in the challenges earlier that adult schools and non-credit classes hours are not as easily like documented or captured as like normal credits, right? Or like community college credits, for example. And so how do students kind of prove their attendance in those if it's not being properly or like accurately documented? And then we also kind of wanted to share this video uplifting a lot of those things that I mentioned earlier in the slide, right? To kind of talk about how this is like affecting also an educator who's supporting those students. And I feel like there's a lot of resonance with what folks have already kind of named in the Mentimeter and what I'm hearing from some of our participants here. So let me just double check that I have the sound. Let me stop sharing really quick. And then feel free to also put questions and things like that in the chat. Because I know we are kind of going, but we'll have for questions too later, but you can put them now if you need to. Just doing this.
Ellen, you're showing your agenda?
Oops, sorry. Wrong screen. Thank you, Nancy. Let me know if this sounds.
A discrepancy that we noticed when implementing AB 540 SB 68 legislation is that currently we don't have one location where we can find answers to questions about implementing the policy. This becomes significant when undocumented students or other immigrant status students are trying to apply to transfer to the university. As they transfer, they have to complete the AB 540 affidavit form and get evaluated again at the next campus. As a counselor, I need to guide them to the process of filling out their affidavit. And because the processes look different, not only across the systems, but across the campuses, I'm always left to search multiple campuses to get those answers. But if we have an FAQ or system-wise a document that just provides some guidelines in terms of filing for the AB 540 affidavit, it will be extremely beneficial for the students and for the practitioners so that educators can go to one place directly to find the answers in regards to how to implement or how to interpret the policy of AB 540 and or SB 68.
Okay. Yeah. So I feel like I've kind of heard like similar things being mentioned here in this space, right, to what Carmen is talking about. And I think basically what she's saying, right, like despite both like Immigrants Rising and just everybody's collective efforts in like creating more resources, increasing knowledge and having trainings around support for AB 540 and kind of expanding like and calling for interdepartmental collaborations on some campuses, eligible students are still being denied access for AB 540. And so I think a lot of the key discrepancies that that Carmen also touched on, and I think what's coming up here on the spot on this participant are listed here on the screen for you all, just really around like, it's really around things like not having important components of SB 68 actually be uplifted to let more students know that they actually have other pathways to qualify, even if they didn't do the 3 years of high school here. There's lack of information around specific policies that impact access. And then there's, again, those things around like uncertainty of having a high school diploma from another country or state that prevent people from being eligible. And there's also still like a lot of questions around status and types of visas or expired visas that also could pose a lot of challenges for students who are trying to qualify for AB 540. So I think in our work, these were some of the key discrepancies that we uplifted. But as we were kind of doing here in Immigrants Rising, as we're kind of digging deeper into some of the AB 540 experiences across campuses, both from the student and educator side, more of these like concerns actually came up. And so I'm actually going to pass it to Nancy on how we kind of like address those, uplifted and address those concerns, and how today's resource plans to also like solve or not solve, but like address some of the problems that's coming up for students and educators.
Thanks, Madeline. We really appreciate you giving that overview, right? And just kind of seeing sort of how we at Immigrants Rising, looking at the statewide level, we're really able to gather this information from multiple places, tried to address it through some of the trainings, and realized that we needed a systemic approach to be able to kind of equitably address this. So we did that audit around the key discrepancies. We looked at individual websites, as well as the Chancellor's Office at the CCC and the CSU, as well as the UC Office of the President website and affidavits, and came up with these key discrepancies documents, which we elevated to each of the system leaders. And then when we had our 20-year anniversary of AB 540 back in 2001, in October of 2021, we got commitment from each of these different systems that they would work with us in an intersegmental work group to be able to address some of these on more of a systemic scale. So that was really exciting for us. And we started that, I think we thought it was going to be done in a couple of months. And in fact, just recognizing the importance of getting input from various people, it took a little bit longer than we originally planned, but we're really excited that we were able to get together the intersegmental work group, which had not just individuals from the systems, but also financial aid practitioners, undocumented student practitioners, admissions practitioners, students, and pulled together the review of these discrepancies and also elevated other concerns. We did a survey with individuals from the Undocumented Student Center, as well as admissions advisors, and then also had a great student panel come together. And so the concerns of that came together in developing drafts of the statewide FAQ. We went through a couple, we're up to draft 9, but as we did each draft, we were able to incorporate more feedback from system personnel and other key stakeholders. And we were able to, in August, submit that FAQ to the legal counsels from each of the different systems, the UC Office of the President, the CSU Chancellor's Office, and the CCC Chancellor's Office. And we were very excited that al final de cuentas, we have been able to get systemic approval from the CCC Chancellor's Office and the UC Office of the President to date. And we're still working, trying to pull in the CSU Chancellor's Office to co-brand it with them as well. I think that, so we are planning and moving forward. We're going to have a release, yay, of the FAQ in May, because it's taken about 2 years from inception to actual release, and in that release, we really are looking forward to being able to say that we have affirmation of systemic buy-in, and that there's going to be dissemination to departmental listservs, as well as placement in systemic websites. And and some of that direction and dissemination will be to have them listed in their websites as well. We also are calling on all of you and everybody else throughout the state to be able to attend the statewide webinar, which we're firming the date, but it should be in the 1st or 2nd week of May. We'll make sure that you know. We're creating a toolkit for dissemination. And then we're going to actually be elevating practices that you and others can take to implement that FAQ on your campus. So hooray, it's coming. We're so excited. And in the next slide, you're going to see how we think that actually some of these issues are going to be addressed. So you'll see that we have an introduction, an overview of the document, the eligibility, including immigration status, attendance requirements at the school, diploma and transfer requirements. We're also addressing a little bit like, what's the difference between California residency for tuition purposes and AB 540? What about students who have DACA, TPS, or U visas? And then we're also making sure that it's much clearer about the process of the affidavit process. How do you show proof of attendance, the timing, of the AB 540 approval, and also the important connection between AB 540 and financial aid. So when you start to come up with new questions and you're like, hey, how about, I'm thinking about, go ahead, girl. I'm thinking about some of the different pieces in the, we're looking at some of the different questions that you can have. You'll be able to see that if you have an expired visa, we're actually going to be, you can go right to this part of the FAQ and be like, what if people have out of status or not active visas? Shout out to Anna Manuel from the UC Immigration Legal Services who helped develop this. Also just thinking about like, what about the order in which the classes are taken? If you take your non-credit classes first and then your CCC and then you go back to adult school, when and where can students take classes is something that's actually going to be addressed. And then what about people who have a high school diploma? We've talked to people who have high school diplomas in another state or even in another country, and they're just straight out being denied based on that fact. There's actually a question specifically that addresses when the FAQ. We want this information in your hands, and then processing of the affidavit. Some people have deadlines here, some people have deadlines there, some people require self-certification and not. Boom, timing and processing of the AB 540 approval. And this is not the exhaustive list, but what about if your financial aid won't disperse, right? So if your financial aid won't disperse, we have a section about AB 540 and financial aid. Now, financial aid, of course, is the purview of the California Student Aid Commission, but we do know that AB 540 is the key that opens the door to being able to receive the financial aid that students have eligibility for. So that's why we wanted to make sure that this was included. So this is a labor of love, but it's also been a labor that has brought in the perspectives of many different people. And our plan is this is not a one and done situation. This is going to be dated as of May 2023. And then there's going to be a set time that the systems get together moving forward to be able to make sure that if there's new legislation or new areas, that those get addressed and implemented. So we're really excited. As Madeline said in the chat, we're previewing it today. We're putting the final touches and the design on it. So that the webinar is actually when the AB 540 FAQ will be released, but get ready, it's coming.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Yeah, and I think as folks are kind of seeing some of these sections and questions that this FAQ is answering, we do also want you to think about like how can you use this on your campus to kind of help address some of the problems that folks have named today, right? I think this FAQ really does go hand in hand with things like continuing education, advocacy, and trainings for our campuses. But at least there's like one clear guidance across all of the systems that can help your students and help yourself better guide the folks that you are working with directly. And so I think with that, before we kind of open it up for questions or comments, we do want to hear directly from our folks who have participated in our work group. Like Nancy mentioned earlier, this was a long labor of love made by a lot of different people who have on the ground experience around AB 540 and supporting undocumented students. And so we actually pulled 3 folks from our work group today. Their names are listed here on the screen, and I'll have them do maybe just another quick intro as we kind of talk, as we get started with the panel. But we'll go in this order that's listed on the screen. And so I'll ask Anna Manuel first to introduce herself again and just do a brief description of how you support undocumented students in your system, and how will this FAQ support the problems that you see in your day-to-day, and how do you kind of see your department or your campus or your system really using this FAQ? And that will be the same question for Rose and Maria. So we'll go with Anna first.
Great, thanks, Madeline. Hello, everyone. So I'm gonna explain first what it is we do, UC Immigrant Legal Services. For anyone who's unfamiliar, is we provide immigration legal services to undocumented students as well as their family members, and also to mixed status families within the UC system. And the community colleges and the CSUs also have their own immigration legal services now. So it's really exciting that that all the public institutions in California are offering that. And so we were asked to weigh in on the FAQ specifically, as Madeline mentioned earlier, with regard to the immigration status question, which comes up a lot. And so it was a good timing, because we started to actually receive a lot of these questions from both students and administrators around the time when we were asked to weigh in on the FAQ. So it was helpful that a lot of examples were coming up for us specifically. The one most common issue that arises is the issue of like the Mexican border crossing card, right? Something like the Mexican border crossing card, it's a 10-year visitor visa, right, for somebody to enter the US. But the problem is that, you know, a person can't enter and stay for 10 years. And so under AB 540 SB 68, you know, a person can't have a certain immigration status, such as a visitor visa immigration status. And so there's been confusion about, you know, oh, this person is within their 10 years, so they don't qualify for AB 540. Not true, right? Because they only are allowed to come in and stay for 6 months. And so basically, it's been our role a number of times to have to clarify whether a person is actually out of status, which is a little bizarre for an immigration attorney to have to do. We usually spend our time arguing that people do have status or you know, are eligible for status. And in this situation, we have to make it clear to administrators, no, this person does not have immigration status, right? And so we wrote up that for the FAQ, and it's been really helpful just to have that in writing for our own center's purposes to clarify for folks. And so another common issue is also, as was mentioned earlier, the kind of the grayer areas when it comes to status, like asylum, pending, or a U visa, that don't necessarily fall under AB 540. So it's really great that the FAQ includes these disclaimers that it's like there are other ways to also be recognized as a quasi-resident, right, and receive in-state tuition. And so it's also really important to highlight that. At the UC, I refer to the residence manual in order to answer those questions. I often also have to contact people at the Office of the President for clarification. And so yeah, that's also another place where the FAQ is helpful in directing that you should investigate this further, right? Just don't just take no for an answer. And then there's this other lesser common issue where certain individuals will debate dropping their immigration status for purposes of qualifying for in-state residency tuition. And for this, it's such a hard discussion. And so, we recommend wholeheartedly get an immigration screening, right? Everyone has access to an immigration screening. So get an immigration screening to determine what the risks are associated with that, weighing out the benefits, because we understand school is very important. But, if it's people just need to understand how it's going to adversely impact their immigration situations. So all that is to say, every institution now has legal services, immigration legal services, and we like to be a resource. Immigration attorneys love to be helpful. That's why we went into this business. And we also really like to correct other people who make determinations about status that are incorrect. And so I'm going to go ahead and volunteer all the attorneys who serve the CCCs and the CSUs as well, that if there's ever any questions in regard to the immigration status component of AB 540 and SB 68, definitely hit up the attorneys. And I have the links to all the institutions' appointment pages. I'll put them in the chat momentarily. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And then there's, just broadly having this FAQ will be so helpful to our center in terms of the other questions, right? The non-status questions, because we receive these questions from students, whether it be because we're convenient or they just think, oh, it's based on a law, so you must know, or they don't have a relationship with the undocumented student program. We hate shuffling students around, and so we'll be so happy to be able to answer not just the the status questions, but the other questions as well. And so
Great. Thank you so much, Anna, for sharing all of that too, right? And for putting those links in the chat as well, and for your just whole work in this whole process. And so I'll pass it over to Rose to go next, to just share like what she does to support undocumented students and how is this going to help your day-to-day and your campus's work.
Thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Rose Carmona. I'm the Student Services Lead for the Metro College Success Program at San Francisco State. I have a long history at SF State, actually prior to the implementation of the California DREAM Act and DACA. So doing things really from the bottom up has been a long history at SF State, knocking down administrator doors, just having, including students, really administrators listen to students. They don't necessarily listen to staff and faculty, but students get their attention. So I've had the honor and privilege to be alongside amazing student leaders who have been advocated for institutional change at SF State for many years. With the FAQ, I'm excited about rolling this amazing resource out. In recent years, as other folks in the Zoom have shared, there's just been a lot of turnover. A lot with the turnover goes institutional knowledge. So, we want to make sure that policies and that there's actually institutional policies and practices versus this person is doing it this way, and that's how we're going to do it. And so I feel like with recent years, especially during COVID, many folks have left the institution. One big example of this is our amazing dream coordinator transitioned to another institution, who she worked really hard to get all of our institutional research data collected around undocumented students. So we had all the knowledge around and all the data around like where are undocumented students, which colleges, graduation rates, et cetera. And unfortunately, once she left, little did we know that the institutional research stopped collecting that data. And therefore, we're currently in a place where we have to start that whole process over. So I think that's one part, right? The turnover. In terms of the FAQ, I'm excited also just for there to be going back to that clear, consistent information, and also that it's not just one system that is following or, you know, helping use this guide for all the systems. We have many students who transfer to San Francisco State and are devastated because they have been benefiting from receiving AB 540. And then once they go through the transfer process, at some point, there's a roadblock where they're told, actually, you don't qualify. So trying to eliminate those barriers for students so that they can continue with their goals and their academic dreams of graduating from college. And then I think the last thing that I would like to address is just the community, I think, that has come out of this resource. You know, in all of my years of doing this work, I think, you know, being in the same room with other college partners at the community college level, at this UC level, there's a, you know, community-based organizations is so critical to our student success. So I'm really excited about that.
Thank you so much, Rose, for sharing all of that. And also even just like going through the history, right? And how hard it is to build the support in specific campuses, and what does it mean when that person is gone, and how this FAQ also helps with that institutional knowledge, so it doesn't just fall on one person to be the person for our students. So I think with that too, I'll transition to Maria. Just same question, right? Briefly introduce yourself again, and like what your support is of undocumented students on your campus, and how is this going to be helping with some of the things that you see?
Yeah, definitely. Maria Gutierrez, I am the Dream Center coordinator and also do counseling at Chabot College. And I think when I think about the undocumented students that I support, I'm in a really amazing position in which not only am I able to outreach to high school students that are coming into the community college system and run the day-to-day of the Dream Center, and as well as like do the academic counseling. But with my position, I also get to implement AB 540 and approve them. So I think that's something that's very new with my position, and I haven't heard of any other campus doing it that way. So I'm also part of admissions and records, and I have access to approve students. And if for whatever reason they have to be denied, it's not just an email, it's a phone call. Hey, you're denied, but it's because X, Y, and Z. Or do you have this missing transcript, or it looks like you're missing a page? And that way, it's a more friendly process to the students versus just getting a flat out denial, which is very hard with all of the various barriers that they're already facing. So when I think about this FAQ, I feel like I've been in a very amazing situation where I'm able to implement it with an equitable mind frame. But that's unfortunately not the situation for all of the community colleges, UCs, and CSUs. So I think that this FAQ is going to be very helpful with determining that and really being able to have a reference to it. For community college, there is a guide that came out in like 2008 that we were able to go back to. For example, if a student was homeschooled, how would you do that for AB 540? But it's not as in depth as the FAQ that is going to be launched in May. And currently I'm going to go on leave, and I have to train now somebody to take over the AB 540. And I was like, wow, what a great time to have an FAQ, because now not only am I training this person and getting them ready for it, but they're not going to face the same barriers or have to hit them so like face on, because there's another guide that they could reference to. So I was thinking about, we're thinking about how it's going to benefit students and like the implementation. But now it's like, wow, like we get to take it another step further and use it for training purposes. And that's really going to help just shape the way that AB 540 is implemented from campus to campus. So I was really excited that it's not just like, okay, throwing you in there after the training, like go and do it, but they could actually go back and forth with the FAQ. So yeah, I think that's all for this question, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Maria. I think that's also a really good point, right? I think several people on the call have touched on, like, there's only one person who helps the student, right? What happens when that person leaves? Specific example with your case, right? With the leave that you're going to be taking recently. But how can we use this to also like activate and educate more allies on our campus, so that work is not just falling on one person? And yeah, like just also increasing that equitable implementation, not just on our campus, but I think across the different systems. And so thank you all for just sharing all that you did. I think hopefully folks are getting some ideas too of what, even if you're not looking directly at the FAQ right now, like how this could be used on your campus. And I do want to do just like one final wrap up questions for all our panelists, because resources and things like that come out all the time, but it's always not as easily like implemented or like used on our campuses. And so we'll go in the same order that we went, but just my final question for our panelists is, what is one tip that you have to create campus buy-in, or I guess system buy-in in Anna's case, right? For folks to like use and implement this like FAQ in their everyday work.
One of the things that we're starting in the fall is a Dreamer advisory group. And so the plan is to have it be a cross-campus collaboration with faculty, staff members that really want to learn and want to be advocates for undocumented students. And so next week we have Undocu Awareness Week. And so we are using it, one, to launch the interest of anybody who's interested in joining that advisory group, and then also to share a little bit about the current resources that we have and kind of like establish some goals and dreams as to things that we want to have on campus.
Great. And so maybe that's a space to uplift this FAQ from your work too. Thank you, Irene, for sharing that too. But turning it back to our panelists, any tips that you all have? Anybody can just kind of maybe chime in, and then we'll go through the rest of folks before we transition into our next portion.
I can jump in. I am also the Dream Advisory Board chair. So we have representation across campus, such as the Bursar's office, financial aid, admissions, graduate studies, etc. So I think that will be the main go-to place. And then also just through my years of working at San Francisco State, the connections and the collaborations that I have with the campus community, I can share that, and we can distribute that across campus. I think one of the challenges within the CSU is right now we're the only system that hasn't I don't know what the exact word would be.
Yeah.
Approved the FAQ. We have received notification that they will be sharing it with like the Dream Resource Centers across the CSU, which is great. But we're still hopeful that that might change in the near future.
Great. Thank you, Rose. Maria or
Anna?
Yeah.
So I've actually started having conversations with our director of admissions and records, since processing of AB 540 in community colleges goes under admissions and records. And I just said, hey, if it's approved by the chancellor's office attorney, like, then we could definitely implement it. And it's all been positive feedback, because there have been situations where before I took on implementing the AB 540, there were situations where there was a lot of check-in with that individual and the director, like, oh, we don't really know. So now that there's an FAQ, it kind of will ease that. Additionally, for the Dream Center, once it's released, we're definitely going to post it on our website and on our new student. We have a new student guide for students, so that if they need to reference it, it'll be available for students as well as staff. Additionally, with our Vice President of Student Services, we already started having these conversations so that there's buy-in already before it's even released. And just being able to talk about like some of the points and some of the challenges that were faced in the front and in the past that can now have an easy solution. So there's been already a lot of positive feedback from administrators to accept the FAQ.
Great, great. Already a lot of work being done. Thank you, Maria. Anna?
Yeah, we've done a lot of work on building our communications network at the UC for other purposes, awareness campaigns. And so we will certainly be sharing this FAQ out with all of the departments who we have contacts with and have partnerships with. We will also post to our website. We will include it in our newsletter. Yeah, and really just making the connection about how it can serve these, you know, other departments who might not otherwise assume that it would be useful to them.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So I heard from a lot of folks, right, just leveraging the connections that you have with these key departments that serve our undocumented students and making sure that this FAQ is like in their hands and they know how to use it and they understand what problems it's solving. And that can gradually and like, not slowly, but just it can kind of trickle out, and that can help create that campus buy-in so that this is actually utilized on our campuses and help provide that equitable implementation that it was intended to achieve with AB 540.